This is the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. This particular model is the Prime OC from ASUS. ASUS sent this card over to me for review. However, all thoughts and opinions are my own. And here we are, the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. I'm about a day late and $1 short on getting this video done. And the reason for that is because, well, I'm a one-man team. I have a full-time day job, and there have been a ton of GPU reviews to do lately, and there are more coming. Don't get me wrong, it is a lot of work, but I'm very grateful for all of these opportunities. So thank you to viewers like you who support the channel, because it really goes a long way in helping me out and allowing me to have opportunities like this. So again, thank you. And if you're new here, please consider getting subscribed. And if you're a returning viewer, hit the like button, because it really does go a long way in helping me out. All right, AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. So this is the Prime OC model from ASUS, and normally ASUS would send me the Tough Gaming model, and that is what I was supposed to get, because that's pretty much what I've gotten all the way through the product stack, with the exception of the Astral for the RTX 5080. However, there was a mix-up with logistics, and somehow I ended up with a Prime model, or the Prime OC model, I should say. But you know what? It's okay, because it gives me the opportunity to try something different and see what another product offering is like. In case you didn't know, ASUS, like many other board partners, offers a variety of different tiers at different price points. So you have the Prime model, which is your entry-level model, and then you have a step above that, which would be the Tough Gaming model. It will be a little bit more expensive, but overall it is a little bit better of a GPU. And then above that you have the ROG Strix series, and above that you now have the ROG Astral series. So you have different options to choose from, and there are different tiers. And in addition to that, there's a ProArt series that fits somewhere in there, right? Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot there, but today we're talking about the Prime OC RX 9070 XT. So what can you expect from today's video? In today's video, we will be doing an unboxing, and then we will talk about the specifications of the 9070 XT. This will include the specifications of the card from an AMD perspective, as well as the overall feature set from the ASUS side of things. And then I'll talk about thermal testing. We'll get into gaming benchmarks after that, and then finish up with some overall final thoughts. And next up here is all the hardware used for all the testing done on the 9070 XT. So all the results you'll see today, from thermals to gaming benchmarks, are from the hardware that you see on the screen right now. I won't take the time to cover all the parts, but they are there for those who are interested. Feel free to pause the video and take a look. And now let's talk about what you get in the box. And for the unboxing, it's actually very simple and straightforward. You basically get the GPU, which is the 9070 XT OC, and you also get all your supplemental documentation, such as your quick start guide and a dedicated thank you message from ASUS. And now if you're thinking, wow, that was actually a very short unboxing, you don't really get a whole lot there. Well, it is the Prime model, right? So again, looking at the tiers, it's on the lower end of that. And so if you do get a Tough Gaming or a Strix, you'll have a few more accessories in the box. And I'm only taking the time to note this because I've actually been getting a lot of questions lately in my comment section where people ask me, should I get the Prime? Should I get the Tough Gaming? You know, what's the difference? Well, that is one of the differences. Now, something else that you'll notice that also was not in the box was some type of special adapter connector that you need in order to connect to a special 12-volt high power connector and all of that stuff, because AMD is not doing that, or at least they're not forcing their partners to do that. And so ASUS has opted for the traditional 3 8-pin design here. It's a tried and true design, which is a big selling point. And now, talking about the design, let's get into the specifications of the 9070 XT. So at first, we'll talk about the AMD side of it, and then we'll talk about the ASUS side of it. Okay, so the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT has 64 compute units, has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which is GDDR6, and the rated game clock speed is 2.4 gigahertz, and the boost clock speed is up to 3 gigahertz. And with this being an OC model from ASUS, we are able to clock above 3 gigahertz. And the memory interface is 256-bit. The Infinity Cache is 64 megabytes, and the total board power is rated at 304 watts. However, with this being an OC model from ASUS, we are allowed to go a little bit beyond that. And finally, the RX 9070 XT is based on AMD's RDNA 4 architecture. And now let's switch over and start talking about the ASUS specifications for the 9070 XT Prime OC. Okay, as stated before, this is using a triple 8-pin design for power delivery. Speaking of power delivery, even though though it's not using the 12-volt high-powered connector, it still has a red dedicated LED light that will let you know if any one of your 8 pins are not properly plugged in, which is always a nice to have feature on any GPU. Now, the Asus Prime 9070 XT OC model has a triple fan design. All 3 fans are Axial-Tech fans. All 3 fans do have dual ball bearings, and this card does support a 0 dB mode. All 3 fans will come to a stop when the GPU temperatures fall below 55°C. And all 3 fans will start up again once the temperatures rise above 60°C. And speaking of cooling, let's flip the card over and look at the back side. And as you can see, we do have a fairly large vented area on the back plate. This will allow for more heat dissipation and greater airflow. Additionally, this GPU is using a phase change GPU thermal pad, and the idea behind that is that it should make better contact than something like traditional thermal paste, which should lead to better temperatures overall. In addition to that, Asus claims to have an exclusive manufacturing technique, which they refer to as max contact heat spreader. And the short version is that the overall temperatures can be up to 2°C lower. In terms of overall design, this card is only a 2.5 slot card, making it perfect for small form factor builds. Or at least I should probably say it allows for greater compatibility amongst all the different PC cases out there. But these days it's very common to see very large GPUs, making it harder and harder to go small form factor. So a 2.5 slot design on a card like this is actually very good. I will have the official dimensions of the card on the screen right now for your reference. And in terms of I/O, this card has 3 DisplayPort 2.1a ports and 1 HDMI 2.1b port, surrounded by a 304 stainless steel bracket. And one final design mention before we get into the actual testing, and that is the GPU guard and bracket that Asus has added on this GPU. GPUs are getting bigger and bigger and heavier, and the 40 series cards were known to have some cracks and breaks on the PCB and around the GPU die itself. And so this is the solution that Asus has come up with to hopefully mitigate that from happening. Okay, now it's time to switch over and start talking about the thermal results for this card. So this card does offer a dual BIOS, and so out of the box it is in the performance mode marked with a P on the card. You can manually switch it over to the quiet mode marked with a Q. Now the difference is very simple. The performance mode will run a little bit louder, but it will also run colder, therefore giving you better performance. The quiet mode will be quieter, but it will run hotter because the fans will not have as high of an RPM. Starting off with idle temperatures on the desktop. After sitting idle for about 10 minutes, the max GPU temperature was only 31°C. The average temperature was 28.1°C. The max GPU memory temperature was 52°C with an average of 50.3°C. The GPU hotspot temperature had a maximum of 34°C with an average of 31.3°C. The total graphics power had a maximum of 16 watts with an average of 11.7 watts. The total board power had a maximum of 18 watts with an average of 14 watts. The GPU fan RPM is all zeros across the board thanks to the 0 dB mode supported by this card. Now switching over to Furmark for a 10-minute stress test. With the dual BIOS in performance mode, the maximum GPU temperature was 57°C with an average of 56.4°C. The GPU memory temperature had a maximum of 88°C with an average of 84.8°C. The GPU hotspot temperature had a maximum of 80°C with an average of 78.6°C. The total graphics power had a maximum of 278 watts with an average of 276 watts. The total board power had a maximum and an average of 317 watts. The GPU fan speed had a max speed of 1,502 RPM with an average of 1,409 RPM. Now switching over and with the dual BIOS in quiet mode, the GPU temperature had a maximum of 65°C with an average of 64°C. The GPU memory temperature had a maximum of 94°C with an average of 91.9°C. The GPU hotspot temperature had a maximum of 87°C with an average of 86.5°C. The total graphics power had a maximum of 276 watts with an average of 275 watts. The total board power had a maximum and an average of 317 watts. The GPU fan had a maximum speed of 1,185 RPM with an average of 1,119 RPM. Okay, so we saw exactly what we expected to see there. The performance mode was running colder while having a higher fan RPM, therefore putting out more noise. And the quiet mode was running hotter while having a lower fan RPM, therefore putting out lower noise. So the operating behavior of the card and the dual BIOS is functioning exactly as expected. Now I want to switch over and start talking about gaming performance. This will include talking about FSR4 and raw rasterization, as well as clock speeds and overclocking, things of that nature. So first of all, let's talk about FSR4. So FSR4 is AMD's brand new FSR upscaling technology. It is officially using an AI upscaler here, and this is their direct competitor to DLSS 4. At the time of this recording, AMD's website says they support just under 40 titles with FSR4, with more coming. Now, how do you enable FSR4? Now, the game needs to support FSR 3.1 to begin with. You have to launch the game and enable FSR 3.1, and then you need to shut the game down, and then you need to go into the Adrenalin software and manually activate FSR 4, or you can simply click the HyperRX button, which will also automatically activate it. And so if you've done everything correctly and if the game is supported, then when you launch into the game, you can hit Alt-R on your keyboard to pull up the Adrenalin overlay, and then you can tell for sure that FSR4 is in fact active. If it is not active, you will have a yellow exclamation point. Now, with all that out the way, let's take a look at God of War Ragnarok. I'm going to be honest here. I'm pretty impressed with the overall image quality. I stared at it and I stared at it, and I really didn't see too much of an issue here with my naked eye and not doing a side-by-side comparison. I would say this is probably fairly close to DLSS at this point. However, I will need to do much more extensive testing to definitively make that claim. In terms of latency, I don't have a definitive number, but I was using a mouse and keyboard, and everything honestly felt pretty responsive to me. And please note that the clock speed being reported here by MSI Afterburner unfortunately is not accurate. Now don't worry, for the rest of the video with all the other benchmarks, the clock speeds are being reported accurately there, as I perform those benchmarks at a later date with some fresh installs of all my different tools and monitoring software. But for this FSR4 test, unfortunately, the clock speed is not accurate. But the thing I want to point out here is that the image quality is absolutely phenomenal. And that's the main thing we really want to see, right? Because for the longest time, we had FSR3, and with FSR3, you could put that on quality or balanced or whatever you wanted, and it would improve the frame rate over a native image, for example, and it would be very similar in terms of performance to DLSS. So the performance isn't really the big issue here. The issue has always been image quality when it comes to the FSR upscalers. Well, now AMD is using an AI upscaler very similar to NVIDIA, and the big question here is, did it improve image quality? And I believe the answer here is undoubtedly yes. If you look at the image quality here, I think things look absolutely phenomenal, and I would have no issue playing this personally. Next up, I want to briefly talk about overclocking. So ASUS does offer a free piece of software with all of their GPUs called GPU Tweak 3, and in that software, you can overclock your GPU. Similar to what I'm showing right here on the screen, you can increase the power slider, you can increase the core clock speed, and you can increase the memory clock speed. Now, in addition to this, AMD has their AMD Adrenalin software, which is basically a one-stop shop for all things related to your AMD system, and it's pretty awesome. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to overclock the 9070 XT using GPU Tweak 3, and then I will overclock and undervolt at the same time and do a -15 on the power limit with AMD Adrenalin software just to demonstrate what is possible. And on the left side will be the overclock only, and on the right side will be the overclock and the undervolt, and you are seeing Call of Duty Black Ops 6 1440p gameplay here on the extreme quality preset. And as you can see here, the final numbers are more or less about the same. If you put in more work and you do the overclock plus the undervolt plus the power limit, you can squeeze out just a little bit more performance. And so you'll have to evaluate if the extra effort is worth it. But in my opinion, the bigger advantage here is not the final frame rates, but the final power consumption. As you can see on the right hand side, there is a noticeable decrease in power consumption. Please note this is only a one game sample size, and results may vary from game to game. And now it's time to switch over and start talking about the rest of the gaming benchmarks. Now these will be out of the box benchmarks. What does that mean? No additional overclocking, no undervolting, no power limiting or anything like that. Whatever the card was set to is what I'm using out of the box. And so the Asus PrimeOC 9070 XT is already an overclocked model when compared to AMD's reference design. In addition to that, it is set to the performance mode in terms of the dual BIOS out of the box. And so that is exactly how I'm using it for all of these benchmarks. And for the comparison GPU, I am comparing it to the NVIDIA RTX 5070 Ti Tough Gaming OC model. So it will be AMD versus NVIDIA, and it will be two equivalent cards, and it will be two Asus cards, but the class of card is not the same. It'll be a Prime model versus a Tough Gaming model. I've already done a full review on the Tough Gaming OC 5070 Ti. That's up on the channel if you want to check it out. And finally, this is what to expect here. All of these benchmarks will be at 1440p on the maximum quality preset. And then we will do mostly native rasterization or native rendering, and then we will do a little bit of ray tracing and a little bit of FSR versus DLSS as well, and then close out with some overall final thoughts. And starting off with Assassin's Creed Mirage, again 1440p on the ultra high preset here. The final average for the 9070 XT was 156 FPS with a 1% low of 103 FPS, whereas the 5070 Ti had a final average of 149 FPS with a 1% low of 111 FPS. So the 1% lows are better with the 5070 Ti, but the overall averages are better with the 9070 XT. You can also see that the 9070 XT does have higher clock speeds out of the box when compared to the 5070 Ti. Now, it is worth noting that in the majority of these benchmarks, you will see that the 9070 XT often runs hotter, and that can easily be attributed to the extra amount of power that it consumes. And that is one other reason why I showcased the undervolt combined with a power limit earlier, just so you know the different tools you have at your disposal, but please keep these things in mind as you look at the benchmarks. And next up, we have Call of Duty Black Ops 6 1440p on the extreme quality preset. The 9070 XT has a final average of 159 FPS with a 1% low of 114 FPS. Meanwhile, the 5070 Ti has a final average of 126 FPS with a 1% low of 93 FPS. And I'm not really too surprised by this because all the Call of Duty titles over the last several years have really favored AMD hardware, and it's no different here. Once again, we do see that the clock speeds for the 9070 XT are higher than the clock speeds for the 5070 Ti. And now the thing here that I find very interesting is that once again, the 9070 XT is pulling in more wattage, and it is running hotter than the 5070 Ti, but not by a lot. You're talking about a 1 to 2C delta. Outside of that, they're about the same, and that is very impressive and very interesting here. Next up is Far Cry 6. I ran the in-game built-in benchmark. This is native 1440p on the ultra quality preset. The final average for the 9070 XT is 206 FPS with a minimum of 171 FPS. The final average for the 5070 Ti is 194 FPS with a minimum of 168 FPS. So the 9070 XT definitely is ahead here over the 5070 Ti. And once again, it's the same story all over again. The 9070 XT runs hotter. The 9070 XT pulls in significantly more wattage. But also, once again, you can power limit, you can undervolt. Again, you do have options here, so that is something to consider. But in terms of just out-of-the-box performance, this benchmark goes to the 9070 XT. Next up is Forza Horizon 5. I ran the in-game built-in benchmark. This is native 1440p on the extreme quality preset with everything absolutely maxed out. This does have ray tracing included in the benchmark. The 9070 XT has a final average of 145 FPS with a minimum of 120 FPS. Meanwhile, the 5070 Ti has a final average of 159 FPS with a minimum of 134 FPS. And so overall, the 5070 Ti here is faster than the 9070 XT. But honestly, this could just come down to the ray tracing advantage that NVIDIA has over AMD. AMD has made substantial gains in the ray tracing department, but NVIDIA is still ahead. And when we look at our GPU clock speeds, again, the 9070 XT is clocking higher. And when we look at our GPU temperatures, again, the 9070 XT is running hotter. And when we look at our GPU power consumption, the 9070 XT is pulling in more power. Okay, next up is Cyberpunk 2077, native 1440p on the ultra quality preset. The final average for the 9070 XT is 131 FPS with a minimum of 109 FPS. Meanwhile, the 5070 Ti has a final average of 126 FPS with a minimum of 102 FPS. So this does not have ray tracing in it. So when you're talking about pure raw rasterization here in one of the most demanding games to come out over the last several years, the 9070 XT actually has the advantage here here over the 5070 Ti. Also, it is definitely worth noting here that in this particular game, the 9070 XT is still clocking higher than the 5070 Ti, but it's not clocking as high as it does in all the other games. Furthermore, the 9070 XT is still pulling in more power than the 5070 Ti, but somehow, some way, the 9070 XT is coming in a little bit colder than the 5070 Ti in this particular game. So very interesting results. But what happens whenever we check out ray tracing? Okay, now we're back at 1440p, but this time it's on the ultra ray tracing preset, and this is where we see the story turn around here. The 5070 Ti is faster than the 9070 XT, and this comes back down to the ray tracing advantage I was talking about earlier. So your final average for the 5070 Ti is 61 FPS versus 52 FPS on the 9070 XT, and your final minimums on the 5070 Ti is 53 FPS versus 46 on the 9070 XT. But even still, I want to give props here to AMD because this is overall a massive improvement from where they were in the past in terms of ray tracing. They have made a substantial improvement here, and this is definitely on the right path to success in my opinion. And now this benchmark continues to be filled with interesting results because also this is the first time that we've seen the 9070 XT have its clock speeds cut all the way down to where it falls below the 5070 Ti. So the moment we enabled ray tracing here, the 5070 Ti's clock speeds pulled ahead of the 9070 XT. Okay, now I'm enabling upscaling technologies. So again, now we're shooting for 1440p on the ultra ray tracing preset, FSR quality versus DLSS quality, and you can see the final average for the 9070 XT is 91 FPS with a minimum of 80 FPS. Meanwhile, the 5070 Ti has a final average of 95 FPS with a minimum of 84 FPS. And so out of the 3 benchmarks we just ran in Cyberpunk, the 5070 Ti did win 2 out of 3. However, there's an argument to be made here that the 9070 XT won the most important benchmark here, which is the native rendering benchmark with no ray tracing and no upscaling. But then you can counter argue that and say that Cyberpunk is meant to be ran with ray tracing. Cyberpunk is meant to be ran with upscaling technologies. And if you do factor those things in, and if you are a Cyberpunk player, the advantage here does go to the 5070 Ti. And to properly close it out, you still have more power draw on the 9070 XT here, and the GPU clock speed is still higher on the 9070 XT, although now with all the upscaling and ray tracing involved, the clock speeds are very, very similar. But somehow, some way, the 5070 Ti is still coming in just a little bit hotter than the 9070 XT. All right, so here's my final thoughts on the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. Overall, it's a good GPU. I like it. I do recommend it. And my experience with it, although very limited, has been also very positive. I'm happy to report that there was no massive day one driver issues that really will get me up here to complain about anything. There is nothing really to complain about here. It is a good card, and I do recommend the card. With that being said, I've said the same thing now multiple times, and I will continue to say it. This GPU generation, I think there are 2 go-to GPUs for the majority of gamers out there. The AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT and the NVIDIA RTX 5070 Ti. Now that gets into a whole other debate of, should you go NVIDIA or AMD? Why not? And that's a whole other video I can make, and I probably will make it. With that being said though, you should do your research and see all the different pros and cons you can have from going to NVIDIA over AMD or going with AMD over NVIDIA. With that being said, I will say that I think AMD has really closed the gap this generation when it comes to comparisons between AMD and NVIDIA. I think they are closer than ever before. FSR 4 is a massive, massive upgrade this GPU generation for AMD. While the image quality and feature set of DLSS might still be ever so slightly ahead, AMD is right there on the tail of NVIDIA. With that being said, let's talk about the Prime OC model. This is my first time using a Prime OC, and I'll say there's nothing really wrong with it. I didn't have a bad experience with it. I think overall it was a well-performing card. However, I am partial to the Tough Gaming cards. I have used the Tough Gaming cards now for pretty much every other review out there, and I do see the quality differences in the cards. I just got a comment, I think a day or two ago, where somebody literally asked me, hey, should I get the Prime OC or should I get the Tough Gaming OC? And honestly, here is my very genuine reply to that question. If you're looking to save as much money as possible while still getting the majority of all the performance possible, go with the Prime OC. There's nothing wrong with it, and you'll save money. However, if you do want a little bit more quality, then go with the Tough Gaming OC. The Tough Gaming cards, for example, they have a little bit of RGB lighting, not a lot. It's not overkill. It's not like the Strix or the Astral or anything like that. It's just a little bit of RGB lighting, whereas the Prime OC has absolutely none of that. Additionally, the Tough Gaming cards do have a PCB coating to help protect the PCB over time. That's not to say that this PCB is going to crap out or something. It's just to say that the Tough Gaming cards have a slightly different manufacturing process that adds more quality to the overall card. And so that's my honest thoughts on it. I know that sounds like marketing speak, but that is a legitimate difference between the two cards. So those are the two differences, and it will be up to you to decide if paying the extra money for a Tough Gaming card is worth the RGB lighting, is worth the PCB coating, things of that nature. And that's really just something that you can decide. Overall, the 9070 XT came out with a bang, right? I mean, Micro Center posted that video where on launch day, they had people all the way around the corner. Hundreds of people showed up to get the 9070 XT and even the 9070 on launch day. And honestly, that was only possible because AMD delayed the launch of the 9070 and the 9070 XT, and then they used that extra time to stockpile cards at Micro Centers across the United States. And a lot of people had problems with that because not everybody has access to a Micro Center. And then plus that was mostly only in the United States. They didn't really do the same thing in other countries from what I've seen online, but I also don't know how true that is. Now, with that being said, we can talk all day long about MSRPs of the cards, right? The reality is we are in a worldwide trade war. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. The market is incredibly volatile. And so all I can say is check your local market, see what the prices are, and decide for yourself if that is something you're willing to pay or not. Because I can sit here and tell you, hey, don't buy a GPU above this price, but I also have no idea of knowing when or ever if these cards will ever come below a certain price. We just don't know that right now. With that being said, if you're comfortable paying whatever the price is in your market for a 9070 XT, then what I can say is that I do recommend the 9070 XT. I also have no issues with the Prime OC model. And if you're wondering if you should pay the extra and get the Tough Gaming OC, in my opinion, I would prefer a Tough Gaming OC over a Prime OC. But the Prime is still totally fine. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for watching the video. If you found value in this video, please do me a favor, hit the like button and get subscribed. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I can't do it without your help, so help a guy out, all right? Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and until next time, E-Rock out.